Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer. Today we are joined by the one and only Nicholas J. Fuentes. I don't think anybody needs an introduction to him, but maybe some people have never heard of him. But he is here today. He is the host of America First, internationally persecuted man of mystery, and host of Good Morning Greer on Telegram. So, Nick, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Scott?
I'm doing terrific. So I think we want to jump into the big obvious topic from last week, the big bit of news, the serious affront that happened to you. And of course, I'm talking about McDonald's messing up your burger order and you posting about it online saying, at McDonald's, what the fuck is this? And you showed the hamburgers and they were poorly made, poor service. And you know, when I saw that, I was just completely outraged. So how did this happen that McDonald's messed up your burger order?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I went to several different McDonald's. I got the same order. You know, people are saying, hey, you know, maybe one person just messed up your order. But I went to 3 different ones. They put me on the no burger list, I guess.
The no eating good list, yeah.
Yeah, no one's imagining eating good.
There was like a lot of people who were mocking it, but I was like, what's wrong with hitting on good service? And every blue check loves like tweeting out at like companies being like, hey, Delta, why am I not getting, why is this kid yelling at me on my seat? It's like, I can't believe the service. Like they love like tagging companies, and it's really rich that they would attack you for. But you know, at one point before I get on to the other topic is I do like when you deal with companies not giving you customer service. And I've told this story to you a couple of times, but one of my favorite stories is I think you went to a Baskin Robbins at like 3 a.m. and they didn't have your favorite ice cream flavor. And then you called them out and you were blasting Baskin Robbins drive-thru for not having your particular ice cream flavor. And there was a poor follower of yours who recommended that you get organic ice cream at Whole Foods. And then you put him on blast because you were so angry at Baskin Robbins' poor service. And I think this guy turned on you. But so that was one of my favorite Nick Fuentes stories with tagging companies. You should do more like terrible. When company delivers you good service, you should instead like tag them and say like, this is my favorite company. I love eating here. And all their service workers tell me that they love my show and watch it all the time. Even the manager came out, and here's his name, said he's a huge Nick J. Fuentes fan. And that would be an interesting reaction. But of course, the real big news was that you are no longer allowed to fly. You are a threat to the airline industry, apparently. So tell us why you think you were brought on the no-fly list, and actually answer the questions, because there was a lot of people who were doubted that like, oh, no, this is just one airline. It's because you didn't wear your mask right. You know, they were trying to claim that it's has nothing to do with like the TSA system. Why? So explain what happened with that.
Yeah. So, you know, and also to clarify, I never knew I was on the no-fly list. Just sort of set the story up. It was last Tuesday. I was supposed to fly out to Palm Beach, Florida. Actually, the flight was to Fort Lauderdale, but obviously Palm Beach is like an hour south of there. I was supposed to fly out to Palm Beach to do this press conference with Laura Loomer, Michelle Malkin, Vince, and Lauren Witzke to talk about the big tech censorship bill in the Florida state legislature and to encourage the state legislature. I think the state house had not voted on it yet, and Governor Ron DeSantis to intervene and put amendments on the bill to strengthen it. And so I went to the airport early Tuesday morning. Somebody had texted me and said, you know, you may be subject to advanced screening because of your placement near the Capitol on January 6th, because I had heard that other people went through a similar experience. They went to the airport and they had trouble checking into their flight, had trouble getting through security. You know, they swabbed all their stuff down. They went through multiple layers that don't normally happen. So I got to the airport extra early with the expectation that I was going to go through some advanced screening procedure, you know, maybe get my phone swabbed or whatever, but ultimately get through security and get on a plane. And, you know, some people are accusing me of like, I orchestrated this thing or I planned it. It was like this big media story that some kind of strategy where I was going to deliberately get kicked off or not be allowed on the plane and then make a big stink about it and it go viral. And that is ridiculous because, I wanted to go to this rally. I spent thousands of dollars to put together this rally at last minute. It was a last minute thing. We put it together in like 5 days. I had my assistant driving all over Palm Beach looking for a hotel to book, and we got curtains and lights. We set up a stream. We had like 10 interns there, and we invited people from all over the state to come down. Michelle came out. It was a huge, huge ordeal and like a big pain in the ass. Now, obviously, we wanted to do it because it was so important to talk about the big tech censorship bill, but it's not easy to put something like that together. And definitely the plan was to get on the plane and see it through because we had invested a lot in this. It took a long time to plan. So I got there early. I went up and this is a detail. I was unable to check into my flight before I got to the airport. You usually check in on your phone or on your computer. They send you an email. And it wouldn't let me check in. It would let me get all the way through to the final screen and then say, oh, we had trouble processing your request. So I said, oh, okay, well, this is normal. I'll probably just have to print my boarding pass at the airport. I'll get there a little early, I'll go through the screening, whatever. So I get to the airport. I go to the kiosk in front of the airline to print my boarding pass, and that one doesn't help me. It prints me a little customer service slip instead, which is go to this counter. I go, okay. I said, this all seems to me to be what may happen if I'm either I'm on a no-fly list or this is just advanced screening. So I go up to the front desk. I give the lady the customer service slip. She can't check me in either. She gets on the phone. She's on the phone for 30 minutes. And she says, oh, security is saying you can't fly today. And at first I'm thinking she's got it wrong because Lauren Witzke told me that she went through a similar procedure. She had to go to the front desk. Front desk called TSA for 30 minutes. And she told me that TSA then escorted her to the front of the line and then swabbed all her stuff down, opened her suitcase. It took a lot longer, but they eventually let her on her way. So I thought, well, that's what's supposed to happen here. So I said, well, could you try again? I said, maybe there's some kind of an issue here or whatever. I said, but I'm pretty sure I'm good to fly. Why don't you call again? So she calls again. She's on the phone for, I think, another 10, 15 minutes. She goes, no, I'm sorry. They said the same thing. And I said, well, what's going on? I mean, who is it, the airline or is it the airport? Am I in a no-fly list? Who did you call? Was it TSA? And she tells me, I can't tell you anything. All they told me is that you can't fly today. And it's coming from airport security. That's what she told me. Not corporate security, not the airline. It's the TSA, basically. So I said, okay. She goes, did anything happen to you on a plane? Is it a mask thing? Did you get kicked off? Whatever. I said, no, not recently. I said, I think I know what it is. I said, I'm political. I said, I think that's what it must be about. She goes, oh, okay. Yeah, I think so. So just out of curiosity, that was an American Airlines flight to Fort Lauderdale. I went over to the United terminal, which is right across the way. I walked all the way. It was a pretty long walk over because it's O'Hare. O'Hare's a big airport. I walk over to the United terminal and I go to the front desk and I say, hey, so I explained what I just explained to you. I said, hey, I couldn't get on. I said, is there any way that you could tell me if I can get on a plane right now? And she goes, no, you have to buy a ticket and then come back here. And then if you can check in, then I'll know, or, whatever. So I go sit down, I book a United flight. I pay like $300 and I book a United flight to Palm Beach, Florida. Again, fully intending getting on this plane, getting over there. I thought maybe it's the airline. So I walk up to the front desk, same thing. She's on the phone for a half hour, tells me, nope, yeah, you can't fly today. And she tells me, and I Googled your name while I was on the phone, and I think I know why. That's what she told me. So then I come home and I tweet about it. And honestly, I thought nothing of it. Usually when this kind of stuff happens to me, nobody cares. I got banned from DLive. I got banned from all my payment processors. I got banned from Airbnb. I've had all this stuff happen to me since the Capitol, and nobody's really taken much of an interest at all, except for the usual suspects, except for people like you, America First people, America First adjacent people. So I go home and I tweet out, I say, yeah, I'm on a no-fly list. I can't come to the press conference, because that was my immediate concern. It's like, now we got to totally reorient my assistant's down there. He's still got to put the stream together. He's like, you want to go through with this? We were launching our hats that day, so we still had a lot to figure out. So my initial thought was I just got to put something out. And we were even considering even telling people if I was on the no-fly list, because we thought maybe that might be, a bad thing to put out there. But I said, we got to explain why I'm not going to show up to this press conference. Everybody is going to be driving out there to see me, and they're going to be very disappointed if people drive out to see me speak and I'm not there. So I said, well, we gotta tell them what's going on. So I just shoot off a quick tweet in between phone calls, trying to sort this whole mess out and say, hey, yeah, I'm not making it to the press conference. I'm on a no-fly list, but you can catch a stream here, blah, blah, blah. And it starts to blow up. Then everybody starts to pay attention, and people are quote tweeting it. This is outrageous. Oh my gosh. And then what I start to see is this trickle of doubt. Then people start to say, that's not true. He's making that up. He's lying. It was just an airline. People making up all these stories. Well, he got kicked off a flight 3 months ago, or he said this thing on his show. And so just to prove that what I said was happening, Glenn Greenwald said, do you have any proof? And I think so did Lauren Chen. I then drove back out. So I went on InfoWars that morning. I think I did another show, and I drove out to Midway Airport. So the two flights that I just explained, that was an American flight, a United flight, both at O'Hare Airport, which is the bigger airport. So I went all the way back out. I drove to Midway in Cicero. At Southwest. I got to the terminal. I paid for the parking. I go all the way up to the check-in booth. I sit down. I book a flight, this time to Phoenix. I booked a Southwest flight to Phoenix at Midway. So I go to the counter. I wait in line for customer service. I filmed the whole encounter. I didn't post it because it was like a half hour, but I filmed the whole encounter, and maybe I'll send that to a journalist if they're interested. I walk up to the counter. I tell her, hey, I can't check in at the kiosk. Can you help me out? She calls up airport security for a half hour. She calls her supervisor over, and she tells me, no, you can't get on a plane. I called TSA. They're not telling me why. They're not telling me what's going on. I don't know if it's the airline or the airport, but you can't get on. So long story short, it was 2 airports, 3 airlines, 3 different destinations, couldn't board a plane. And, and I'll throw in one more thing, and then there's a long story, so I'll let you respond. But the one other thing is then people say, okay, well, you're on a no-fly list, but you're on a no-fly list for a justifiable reason because you're at the Capitol. Well, I was at the Capitol, but I wasn't inside the Capitol building. I was outside of it. I didn't get charged with a crime. I didn't get convicted of anything. I don't think anybody's even had a trial for any of that yet. But I didn't commit a crime on January 6th. And if I did, they would have picked me up by now because Sherwin, who's leading the whole investigation in D.C., he said that they prioritized the e-celebrities to send a message. So if they could have placed me at the Capitol, they would have. And I happen to know that I'm under FBI investigation for my involvement at the Capitol because people sent in tips and people insinuated all kinds of things that didn't happen. And so basically, I know that if they could geolocate my phone inside the building that day, if they could find security footage of me that day, they would have arrested me. So it's not like I committed a crime there. And then people pointed to in December, there was an incident where I did get kicked off a plane because I wasn't wearing my mask. And I don't want to go into that whole story. That's not exactly what happened, but they kicked me off because I, quote, wasn't being cooperative with the mask policy. And that was in early December. And I just want to correct the record here. People say, oh, that's why you're on a no-fly list. You got deplaned or deboarded for not wearing a mask, so they put you on a no-fly list. And that's just how it works. Those are just the rules. Well, that's not true because that happened when I was flying to Philadelphia for Harrisburg Stop the Steal. I was on, I think, an American flight from O'Hare. I don't remember the airline, but I know it was at, or maybe it was Midway. No, I'm sorry. It was a Southwest flight at Midway, I think. I forget all the details. A long time ago. I could pull it up if people are interested, but that was a flight to Philadelphia from Chicago. I think it was in early December, and I was on my way to the Harrisburg Stop the Steal rally. I went to the other airport. I booked another flight. I think I booked a Delta flight, and I was able to get to Harrisburg. So people say, oh, you got put on the no-fly list because you got kicked off wearing a mask. I flew the same day that I got kicked off that plane, and I flew 7 more times since then, because I flew back to Chicago from Philadelphia. I flew to DC for the 2nd Million MAGA March and back in December. I flew to Miami and back at the end of December. I flew to DC and back for January 6th. And I think there might have even been one more trip within there. So point being, I flew 8 times between when I got kicked off for not wearing a mask and January 7th. So obviously that's not it. I was put on the no-fly list because I was in and around the Capitol on that day, and probably because I'm an e-celebrity.
Yeah, that's interesting. And one of the things that we associate the no-fly list, we associate it with like Al-Qaeda members or ISIS members or like people who are actually terrorists. Not internet radio commentators. They do not associate that with the host, and the fact that they think of you as this great threat that they must prevent from flying is pretty outrageous. And I think the one funny thing is that a lot of these leftists who've built their whole careers off of like demanding Gitmo be shut down, off of saying the no-fly list is unconstitutional, all of them turned into bootlickers when they came to the story. I think there was this one big irony leftist account, I forget its name, that was tweeting about it. It's like, oh, he wasn't kicked off for unconstitutional reasons. This is just private enterprise joining together to ban him for not following mask policy 100%. Which even in that case, like even if it was the mask situation, that's still an outrage that like airlines can ban you permanently for like having a mask down below your nose or something. And like for that just offense, like you just can't fly. You lose your right to flying for even that reason. But even if that was the case, the fact that these people who are supposedly anti-establishment, anti-authoritarian, anti-corporate would celebrate like these corporations deciding together that like, oh, we're not going to let this anti-masker on our plane, or this person who's not following our rules 100%. It's a hall monitor mentality for these supposed Antifa socialists. And why do you think that they've become like the biggest bootlickers in this case? Like anybody, they support big tech, they support these billionaires, and yet they, at the same time, they try to claim that they're anti-corporation, anti-authority.
Well, I think that's like the central question. And I've been talking about that on my show, like more than normal since the Capitol riot on January 6th. I mean, I know you and I have talked about this for a long time, woke Capitol and everything, but especially since January 6th, now that Biden and the Democrats are fully in control of the federal government, now that big tech censored Donald Trump, it's like all of that, but on steroids, BLM and everything in the past year. And honestly, I think it's just a political expediency thing. I think, and I said this on my show the other night, I think that they are under this delusional impression that when they team up with the federal government or the corporations to take out so-called fascists or, Nazis, reactionaries, I think that they're under the impression that they are using the government as like a battering ram against us, that like they are wielding the government. And while they may be good-meaning or well-meaning activists, and they too may be skeptical of government or critical of things that the government does as an institution or corporations, they are sort of expediently and cynically wielding the federal government to take out their perceived urgent political enemies, which are people like me, people like you. And what is so flawed about that kind of thinking is that obviously these nothings, people that, when we talk about leftists, we're talking about people who, in some cases, they might have a certain lineage. You look at like, who is the O'Brien guy from Huffington Post, Luke O'Brien. He's got an interesting pedigree. But for a lot of them, Jared Holt, Megan Squire, these are not people that come from any impressive pedigree. These are not people making any kind of money. These are not influencers. These are not rich people. These are, by and large, and for the most part, similar to you and I, in the same, maybe social class or economic class as us, but they think that they're wielding the national security apparatus of the United States or the intelligence community or something. And obviously that's not the case. It's in reverse. These people are being used. They are an extension of the system, but they're under the impression that they're in control. And when the government does something that they like, when the government punishes fascists, well, they rationalize that. And I would almost prefer, and it would make more sense if they just simply said, well, something bad is happening to my enemy, and that's good. I would get that. I would say, you know what, fair enough. If they said, fuck Nick Fuentes, and I'm glad that he was put on a no-fly list because we don't like him. Now, I would say that, okay, fair game. When bad things happen to my enemies, I say the same thing. I say, I don't have to justify this on principle. I don't have to justify that the mechanism that delivered this good outcome is in principle the best thing ever. I say, well, we're in this conflict. We've got people on our side. There's people on the other side. It's a zero-sum game. And when bad things happen to them, it's good for us. I like that. Now, if they said that, it would make sense. But they do what's called system rationalization. And they take the actions of the system, of the American regime, whether it's private or public, corporate or government, and they rationalize it. They attribute a rational motive to that. Like you said, they say, oh, well, you broke the rules and you got banned. Oh, you were an insurrectionist. You broke the law. And now you're suffering the consequences. Freedom of speech is not freedom from consequences. This is deserved and this is right. And obviously, that's not true. I mean, on principle, that is not something that's worth defending for either side. The idea that government or companies, whichever it is, if I'm on a no-fly list by the government, or if they don't believe that and they think that I just broke the rules and the airlines banned me, it's still something that we should all agree on, that the airlines, which are some of the biggest companies in the world, and in this case would be acting as sort of like an oligarchy or an oligopoly, I should say, and the federal government, both of these institutions should not be able to arbitrarily ban people from flying. I mean, we're talking about the ability to travel freely in America by plane. And it should be the case that you should only be banned if you're a threat to safety on the airplane. If you're going to bring down the plane, hijack the plane, something like that. Not like, well, you're being disruptive. We don't like your political views. So now either the airliners or the government can restrict your ability to travel. I mean, what's next? What other oligopoly in the market can decide that they can collude and deny you service for arbitrary reasons? What else can the government, how else can they sanction and penalize you for having the wrong views? Obviously, that's not in the interest of any person that is not politically connected, rich, or part of the government. That's in the interest of anybody who is in a class that's vulnerable, that this could happen to them, to oppose that. But lefties are rationalizing it rather than just saying, oh, it's bad for him, it's good for us. They say, well, everyone's got to play by the rules, mask up, or Bill Gates is going to kill you, and that's good. So they're totally messed up. And like I said, I think fundamentally it's this delusion that they're wielding the system, when in reality, as we all know, the system is wielding them.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's one case of that, or another example of that, is that the fact that Antifa was traveling last summer, well, all last year, with weapons and luggage and other stuff to stir up riots. And the federal government did nothing about their cross interstate travel. Like, either if they were driving like vans, there was all these vans and trucks that were seen at multiple different riots all over the country. The feds were doing nothing about it. The feds were essentially allowing them to stir up riots throughout the country, and they did nothing about it. They didn't put these people on no-fly lists. And these were people who were actually encouraging terrorist acts, and causing billions of dollars in damage, and like setting fire to federal courthouse buildings. And all you're doing is going to a protest. And there's a very difference of that. And it's like, you can't really see Antifa and these leftists as anything other than an extension of the system. As you said, they're not, they may, as you said, that, they may think that they're wielding the state, or they may even think that they're not wielding the state. I think there's a lot of cognitive dissonance that happens with them, especially when there's that recent CIA recruitment ad where the woman was saying she's cisgender and intersectional and a person of color, and all of these leftist buzzwords. And the entire left tried to insist that this is not an example of the CIA being leftist, or wokeness being a work of the system or helping the system, that it's just nothing big deal. You shouldn't worry about it. The CIA is actually right-wing and reactionary against all, with no evidence to show for that. And so I think they do have trouble, rationalizing it, but at the same time, they're able to, have Patreons that can garner $1 million a year. They can, be featured on MSNBC. They know that they can enjoy their life in comfort, even if they engage in Antifa rioting. feds will drop charges against them. Local district attorneys will drop charges against them because the system sees them only as the foot soldiers, as their Dobermans for accomplishing what they want to accomplish, while the system actually views us as a threat, which is why they actually punish us and persecute us while they essentially roll out the red carpet for Antifa.
Well, right, exactly. And I saw that too with the CIA advertisement. And I think Russia Today reported about it. And they showed some tweets from leftists where they said, leftist Twitter accounts, they said, just because the CIA is co-opting our rhetoric doesn't mean that the CIA is leftist. Basically, like, you know, they're not really left-wing. I remember when I was on that debate a couple of years ago with Hassan Piker and Destiny on the Trainwrecks Twitch channel, I remember arguing with them that the media and the corporations are leftist. They insisted that the media is not left-wing, that social media is not left-wing, corporations are not left-wing, and they say that when you see explicit, overt left-wing programming in their content, when you see explicit and overt left-wing political agenda from like Goldman Sachs on Pride Month or Black History Month or whatever, they said, well, that is just a marketing ploy where they know that if they put across a certain political agenda, people buy their products. In other words, it's like this very cynical calculation, and it's in reaction to demand that the society wants more progressivism. The society wants this kind of stuff, and they are just cynically fulfilling that need. They are still white supremacist reactionaries running these companies potentially, or they're indifferent, or they only care about money, but they're just using this to rope in more suckers or something. And I understand where they're coming from. Like, I kind of get that they're not sincere leftists or whatever. I mean, that very well may be true. What I look at is the actions of the companies and the government and everything like that. Clearly, social media is a good example. Social media, these are the biggest companies in the world, maybe in the history of the world. Amazon, Apple, Facebook, Google, these are, by market cap, some of the biggest companies that have ever existed. We're talking about $1 trillion, $2 trillion market cap, hundreds of billions of dollars, right? And the people that own these companies are the richest people in the world. Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg. I don't know the names of the people. It was Larry Page, I guess, is the one that, didn't he invent Google or something? You know, these are the world's richest people, world's biggest corporations. And these companies are actively engaging in viewpoint discrimination. We all know that. The evidence is out there. They don't ban high-profile leftists. They obviously employ a double standard with leftists versus conservatives. We don't need to relitigate that here. We know that that's occurring. And so while a leftist might say, oh, Jack Dorsey isn't a real leftist, or Mark Zuckerberg isn't a real leftist, or something like that, well, clearly, these social media companies, just by their actions, we know that they do not consider left-wing people to be threatening to the system. We know that as the richest, most powerful people owning the richest, most powerful companies in the world, they do not see anybody that is a progressive, anybody that is left-wing, as a legitimate challenge to their agenda, a legitimate challenge to their system. That's why those people are not banned. Those people are not banned on any of these platforms. They're not banned on Patreon or anything like that. In fact, they're verified. They're elevated. They partner with them. You know, it's like the Young Turks partnered with YouTube, owned by Google, to produce news. So at the minimum, we could say that, well, they're banning some people based on their views, and that is explicitly what they do. Facebook changed the rules back in, I think it was 2019, to explicitly ban people that are white nationalist, white separatist, you know, in any category that is like white identitarian. We know that Twitter and YouTube ban conspiracy theories, ban so-called misinformation about COVID. Facebook bans people that believe in QAnon. So it just turned into overt editorial censorship, overt arbitrary editorial censorship, where they're saying these views we don't like, and we're going to engage in discrimination against them. And what that necessarily says is also the inverse, which is all of these views we accept, tolerate, and in some cases elevate and partner with. And so if these biggest companies owned by the richest people don't see you as a threat, but they clearly see other people as a threat and actively work to ameliorate those people or mitigate those people, what does that tell you about what you do? It shows you that at the minimum, you're not a threat. And at the most, the most you could say about that is you're facilitating the agenda. And if you're talking about social media companies, who is more the system, who is more the power structure than the social media companies and the multi-billionaires that own them? And if you're not threatening to them such that they would discriminate against you, then it really doesn't matter if at the end of the day, Mark Zuckerberg really is a, queer, socialist, BLM, whatever. Clearly the people that are those things are sort of going with the grain. I mean, they're swimming alongside, they're adjacent, or, they're part of the Zuckerberg agenda, either by not opposing it or by actively facilitating it. And so, that's where it blows my mind. It's like, certainly you could say that rich people are not ideologues, but what does it say that all the powerful people are not going against you? And it's just like you said, they've got Patreon, they're platformed by these giant companies. I saw there was some journalist, I put out a tweet the other day that said all left-wing people are the pawns of the power structure, something like that. And this journalist from The Atlantic quote tweeted that and said, oh yeah, I'm really simping for Bill Gates. I'm really simping for Jeff Bezos. And people pointed out, like, hey, you write for The Atlantic. The Atlantic is literally owned by a billionaire, So, okay, yeah, maybe not Bill Gates, but somebody with a $20 billion net worth who owns your publication all the same. And you're on Patreon, and you're verified on Twitter, and you're not banned from any other social media company. So clearly what you're doing is facilitating the regime's agenda.
Yeah, exactly. And they always still insist that like billionaires are behind us. Like it's like billionaires want immigration restriction. They want to divide the races to stay in control. It's like, billionaires are actually the ones promoting like Black Lives Matter, critical race theory, which is really anti-white racism. And they want open borders. Like they are the biggest opponents of immigration restriction, but they have to imagine that the billionaires are on the opposite side and not on their own. And, moving gears to the right is you had a pretty interesting response from conservatives. Usually as you've mentioned before, you've been censored for many things. Like conservatives generally don't care or they cheer on. There were, quite a number of conservatives who, pointed out your case. There was a couple of Daily Wire guys like Matt Walsh. Elijah Schaffer also came to you. And most surprisingly, Dinesh D'Souza did a whole video saying you're the new Rosa Parks. and even Tucker, even though he didn't name you, he did cover that, the TSA is putting political dissidents on its no-fly list. Why do you think that? But there was still like the major publications weren't covering this. Like I didn't see Daily Caller or Breitbart or Washington Examiner have any articles about that. What do you make of the conservative response to what happened last week?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was a little surprising that, some people I expected, people that defended me during Groyper War and defended me during Stop the Steal or, whatever came to my defense. But yeah, I was honestly surprised that Candace Owens brought it up on her interview with Ben Shapiro.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Candace Owens. Yeah, she did.
That was like totally out of left field. And Matt Walsh and Clavin and Knowles, those are all people I feuded with, like you said. So I was a little bit surprised at some of the response that I got. And it was the usual kind of thing where it's like, well, we hate his views and he's a reprehensible hater, but we don't think he should be put on a no-fly list for his views. So, I mean, that was to be expected that they would sort of qualify it by saying that. But to me, it basically shows you who is completely controlled, who is like a 100% controlled opposition person, and who is maybe not so much that way. And I guess it varies because there were some people that just explicitly said, I don't have to say I don't agree with his views. He's on a no-fly list. This should terrify everybody. Why would anybody say we don't agree with him? You don't need to say that. The government is coming down on this guy for his editorial views. Clearly, we've got a bigger problem here than the fact that he said controversial things in the past. And I would say it's definitely less of a good thing when people say, well, this guy's a vicious anti-Semite and anyway, but he shouldn't be banned from the no-fly list, or shouldn't be banned, I should say, from flight, from flight in America.
Yeah.
Those people, generally speaking, are people that are on the side of like what I would say humanity, or the historic American nation. Those are people that more or less can be described as presenting a meaningful challenge to the system. Those are people where I say, even if I've disagreed with them in the past, maybe there's hope for them. Maybe there's hope that there could be some kind of a grand alliance, because it puts everything in perspective. When the government is and we've all said that this is going to happen for a long time, but now that it's happening in real life before our very eyes in real time, now that the government is coming down on people, and you see it banning people from buying guns, freezing bank accounts, putting people on a no-fly list, putting people in solitary confinement for trespassing, the DHS turning inwardly against Trump supporters. Now that we're seeing it and it's happening, it's actually unfolding, it puts things in perspective. It's like, who's really our enemy here? Is somebody like Matt Walsh or Michael Knowles, who agrees with us on 90% of the issues, but obviously we've had a falling out of the past. They work for Ben Shapiro, so that's kind of an issue. But somebody that agrees 90%, but will speak out against something like this, are they really the number one enemy? No, obviously the number one enemy is the state. The number one enemy is the American regime. It's NATO, it's the Atlantic Council, it's all of that. And while often people like Matt Walsh and Michael Knowles, by their sort of gatekeeping strategies, they're preventing this alliance from happening. I don't want to totally fold and say, oh, well, please work with us. Please, you're so terrific. Obviously, it takes two to tango. There's been two sides that have sort of been at each other's throats for a long time. They call us haters, bigots. Our ideas are dangerous. They're not conservative. They're going to gatekeep us. And we say, you're not real conservatives, you're gatekeepers, you're phonies, whatever. There is, I think, some room potentially for maybe a rapprochement or reconciliation. Anybody that spoke out against a no-fly list, I would communicate to them. It's like, you see the imminent threat the government poses to all of us. You see that government will not discriminate. They will not discern between so-called real haters like me and so-called not real haters, people like you, who are the so-called real conservatives and the gatekeepers. The pitch would be to everybody that saw that this was happening and felt the need to speak out. Clearly, we have either got to stick together against this, or they're going to take us all out individually. They're going to go for all of us. And like I said, it's not like it's been one-sided. It's been two-sided. We've been antagonistic towards them. They've been hostile and antagonistic towards us. But my reaction is to say, look, maybe we have more potential allies than we realize. Maybe there's a bigger tent movement than we thought possible. That's going to take some work, I think, on both sides. I think and maybe I'm being naive here. Maybe I'm underestimating the extent to which some of these people that spoke out are ultimately under the thumb of a donor, under the thumb of, a certain interest captured by a certain special interest or something. But I see some hope there. I'm a little bit optimistic because a lot more people than I expected were able to come out and say, look, this is wrong no matter who it is. Conversely, I would say, and this is much more clear, everybody that didn't speak out against it is just like a total, they have just outed themselves as controlled opposition. Every publication, every person, and it's not like you could ignore it. A lot of people are saying, oh, well, maybe Charlie Kirk just didn't hear about it. Not everyone's following you on Twitter. It was trending on political Twitter like number one when it happened. It was on Tucker Carlson. Everybody knows about it, and if they didn't, well, we can remind you, But if you didn't speak out against this, if you're not willing to say something, no matter who it is, that someone gets put on the no-fly list for their political views, then clearly you are not on the side of the American people. You're not on the side of the reaction. You're not on the side of, what it is you're on the side of the American regime. You are on the side of all those interests that I listed, NATO, Atlantic Council, the Biden admin, the social media companies, the corporations. You're on the side of the power structure, just like the leftists. By your complicity, right? By the fact that you are complicit and silent in this, you are, in that sense, working for the regime. And you could say, well, we didn't talk about it because this guy's a hater or whatever. Once again, it comes down to putting it in perspective. Who is the real threat? If you're a true, patriot, if you're a true reactionary, if you're truly opposed to the evil regime, which we could all agree is sick and has to be displaced for the country to get better, then how could you see me, because of my show, which is offensive, as more problematic than the government? Like I'm more problematic with my views and potentially getting a platform by virtue of you talking about me or saying my name than the regime, which is fighting a war on terror against you. I mean, that shows that you're controlled opposition. So I think that was another one of these sort of watershed moments. It forced the issue once again of whose side really are you on? And I think a lot of people answered that. A lot of people showed who they really were. So there are some people where I think I'd be open more now to collaborating with. If Matt Walsh and Michael Knowles want to sit down and have a conversation, they've lied about me. They've said nasty things about me. But because they said that, I think that shows some integrity. And on the other side, what we know to be true is anybody who didn't talk about it, I mean, that just goes to show they are an enemy of any real dissident.
Yeah, some people were celebrating it, such as Ian Miles Chong, who was speaking for Will Chamberlain, was treating it as a great victory that you were not allowed to fly. And of course, Malaysian people who have never stepped foot in America are the true experts on America First and patriotism. So thanks, Ian Miles Chong, for continually putting out that you were supposed to, that airlines making sure you don't fly is actually a defense of liberty. But it's not just like people like Ian Miles Chong and like total scum, like Chamberlain, these people who only care about their petty feuds. There was, Populist Inc. also didn't really talk about you. And when I mean Populist Inc., some people use that term to talk about like MAGA supporters who are just like Trump cultists or whatever. The way I use it is like, it's like people like Sohrab Ahmari, this new thing called American Moment led by Sharab Sharma, some of the Claremont initiatives. It's basically people who, around Yoram Hazony, people around like 2018, 2019 decided that they're going to define what Trumpism is. And they jumped on board when they didn't have to worry about any consequences. And their main goal is to shear off people like Nick and I from their movement so they can have a racist-free movement that is going to gain power and really threaten the system, but it accepts the system's parameters when it comes to discussing race and other issues. So why did you find it interesting that none of these people, even though they're saying that they always talk about threatening the system and abolishing liberalism and it's awful what the totalitarian state we live under, did you find it at all surprising that none of these people spoke about what was happening to you?
No, it was not at all surprising. And I mean, honestly, it wasn't, well, excuse me. I wasn't expecting much. It did take me aback a little bit that I know that Tim Pool, for example, has been evading me for a long time. He said he would have me on a show, and then that never materialized. He said, oh, well, we just came up with all these excuses. So I know that he doesn't want to associate with me. But for him to not even say one thing, to not say anything about this, I mean, that was a little bit of a surprise because that kind of thing is right up this guy's alley. He's got Cassandra on. He's got all these freedom fighters on his show, people that care about liberty, and they talk about Assange and everything. They're liberals. And they wouldn't say one thing about it on the show, on Twitter. That one was a little surprising. And the Claremont people and American Moment and all of that, I mean, that was no surprise because, their goal is basically the same as Koenig. Their goal is the same as Charlie Kirk. Like you said, they decided that they were going to define what Trumpism is, and more importantly, what it isn't. Their Trumpism without Trump, they wanted to define as basically all the garbage. It's going to be an industrial policy, and we're bringing back manufacturing, and I don't know, being more left-wing economically. That's what they interpreted as the real boon from the Trump administration was, well, he reoriented the Republican Party to be more left-wing economically, and that's it. That's all that he did. That's all the good stuff. And the bad stuff is the racism and the offensive tweets and this personality, which alienates people and whatever. And so, I pointed this out on my show last week. You look at that Sohrab Shawarma guy or whatever, and it's like his gay little podcast, his friends over there. It's like no different than a Vice podcast. It is no different than a BuzzFeed podcast. It is the same, except they just have this like aesthetic populism, aesthetic conservatism. You want to know why it's a conservative show? Because they've got a real rustic set. They've got a rustic, wood paneling.
Yeah.
For their set. Everybody's fucking got that, right? Everybody's got that now. It's the plastic, and I'm sure that it's plastic vinyl or something from like Home Depot or whatever. They've got wood paneling. It's a real rustic sort of rugged. It's an earthy sort of a look, and they've got an antique lantern decoration, real rustic antique lantern. They've got a statue of
the real right wingers record out in the oaks. It's oak. It's actually oak trees. Don't have to even worry about wood paneling. But the funny thing about Sharma was never Trumper in 2019. And he was attacking the Groypers hardcore during the Groyper War, and in essence defending Charlie Kirk. And now this guy is like the Mr. Nationalist. And first off, he's like complaining about how many of his family members are being affected in the India COVID thing. It's like, well, if you're a real patriot, you wouldn't have any family members there. It's like, why are you lecturing us about what a real American patriotism is if you're like talking about how we need to do all these things for India because that's where your family is? Like, your family would be here if you're, that's putting America first.
Well, yeah. But Scott, he's drinking scotch. But they're drinking scotch.
That's right. He's a bourbon man.
Yeah, everybody's drinking their bourbon on the show. Oh, yeah, this is a real man's conservative podcast. No, but it's the same. It's an aesthetic conservatism aesthetic. They talk the same. They look the same. It's exactly the same. They're just liberal. These are more liberals, but they articulate this like renewed Heritage Foundation kind of conservatism. And I think I've said this on my show. Populist Inc. is like if you took Trump and you gated up and you like heritage-fied Trumpism. It's like if you took the same program that you have at Heritage Foundation or AEI or whatever, the same sort of student council president, college Republican, think tank creature, and injected Trumpism into his veins, this is what you would get. You would get some faggy Indian guy with a lisp with this creepy smile talking about like, common good originalism. And I went on my show and I said, really? That's what they're pitching now. This guy, Josh Hammer from Daily Wire, goes on their show and says,
it was also never Trump in 2018 as well.
Yes, exactly. Right. All never Trumpers. And he comes on the show and says, yeah, I'm working on this thing called common good originalism. And I think we could justify big government action because in the preamble of the Constitution, it says general welfare, which means common good. And that means that we don't have to be individualists. It's like if you're trying to appeal to the Constitution to justify something, like you're missing the point. If you have to appeal to some ism, if you have to work on some gay intellectual framework and some constitutional roundtable, you are missing the point. That is, like I said, that is the heritage iteration of Trumpism. It won't work. It's not true to Trump. And you're exactly right. Sohrab Shawarma, never Trumper. Josh Hammer, never Trumper. All these people were never Trump. All these people aren't really even right-wing. These people aren't Christian. They're not religious. They don't believe in capital T traditionalism or anything like that. They're not reactionary. And they're not, what's most important, culturally right-wing. What was important about Trump was less the left-wing economic turn or the trade issues. It was the cultural, social identity right-wing shift. It was saying, we're going to say Merry Christmas again, and France is no longer France, that kind of stuff. That is what propelled Trump into the spotlight. It was his comments about illegal immigration that propelled him initially. And the Muslim ban, right? And it was things of that nature. It wasn't him saying, I'm going to put a tariff on China, although, I mean, that helped. I'm not saying that's not an essential part, but it's not the only part, and it may not even be the most important part. The most important part was the cultural, social, and identity right-wing reorientation that he sort of initiated in the Republican Party, and these people don't get that. And they're not going to talk about the no-fly list because they see us as a threat. It's this battle to define, or this battle to become the vanguard of Trumpism in the civil war within the GOP. There's this emerging battle for succession, and one faction inevitably will be the inheritors of the Trump legacy. After Trump was left office, you've now got Nikki Haley and Tim Scott and the usual suspects, and now there's this big war on within the sort of Trump, the post-Trump thing, where people are battling to define who is going to be the Trump inheritor, who is going to be the Trump successor. And you've got these populist Inc. people fiercely battling it out, and they want to be the vanguard of Trumpism. They want to inherit the Trump legacy and therefore the support and the mantle and everything like that. But they want to say, well, we're Trumpism without Trump. That means we're going to refine it. We're going to optimize it. And what does that mean? We're going to fucking gay it up with the usual heritage stuff. We're going to subtract all the based stuff, subtract all the red-pilled, awesome commentary. And instead, we're going to have like this rustic wooden set. We're going to drink bourbon and talk about how what we need is industrial policy, and that's what they are. That's why they don't like us.
That's true. And a lot of these people were involved in doxing as well. Like that's a very important part is like, I see many of the people who are getting influential in this and are buddies with these people were involved in my docs, or they're involved in other people's doxes. And many of them who were even trying to bring down Peter Thiel and others because they thought that he was an enemy. And so these people so doxing is also an important part. So they actually want us on the no-fly list because these people are little petty little tarantulas who just crawl around. But I don't even think they're going to succeed because they're just so dorks and losers that they're not going to appeal to the average base. And generally, if you look at the people who, people are going viral on tweets and stuff and like who have better content, like you have a more loyal following in our sphere than outside it. And a lot of these people still like follow our stuff because then they rip it off and they make it more PC, so to speak. And then but they don't give attribution. So, but I don't think they're going to succeed, but they're going to get a little bit of money and a little bit of attention. But eventually, I think when it comes down to 2024, some of these people are just not going to make it. But, going on to the same topic, I want to throw out a bunch of right-wing figures and get your thoughts on them and their future right now. And you were talking about this before. Obviously, the big person is, I want to get your thoughts on Trump and, what do we see as his future, or what do you particularly see him as his current role now?
Well, it's sort of a tricky thing. We'll probably have a better idea later this year when he announces whether or not and I think that he's going to tell us soon. So that is contingent on obviously whether or not he decides to again. But as it stands right now, with the midterms, which are and that's obviously sooner than the 2024 presidential election, it didn't totally eliminate it, and that controls the endorsements. He's over there in Mar-a-Lago like the president in exile. I guess he's going up to New Jersey now for the summer. And he is basically going to have a large influence over which faction is going to succeed him in the party. Is that going to be a Populist Inc. coalition? Is that going to be somebody like Tim Scott? And we don't really know because with the endorsements, they've been basically inconsistent. He's endorsed people like Marco Rubio and Tim Scott. He's hanging out with Kevin McCarthy in Mar-a-Lago. That indicates that he may seek to bolster some establishment forces because that's what he did during his administration. He bolstered establishment forces, in which case it's very problematic for us because, at once we are trying to pitch ourselves as the rightful heirs to the Trump legacy. We are the true believers in the 2016 Trump revolution. But at the same time, Trump is going out there then and endorsing all the people that we say are rhinos, all the people that we say are no good. At the same time, he is endorsing some base people, and he is opposing Mitch McConnell. He wrote that letter, so it kind of is up in the air. It remains to be seen whether or not he'll be one of our greatest foes, in a sense. Obviously, I love him personally. I don't want to speak for you, but I love him personally, and I believe still in the 2016 revolution, but he may be an impediment to seeing that through now that he's not president, or he may be a game changer. He may be the in the reverse. He may deal the final blow to the establishment. If he goes against the establishment, we could maybe finish it off for good. Not for good, but we could really deal a decisive blow if he came down on the side of more populist nationalist forces. So I see him basically as the kingmaker, and he hasn't made up his mind quite yet on running, on how big of a role he's going to play, and on what side he's going to come down on. But that's long and short what his role will be.
Yeah, that's largely my thoughts. I think he's still a leader. And even with his shortcomings, people complaining about who is he endorsing, etc., I still think he's going to mostly do good. And for right now, I think he would be the best candidate in 2024 just for it shocks the system. Like no other candidate is going to shock the system like him. They actually perceive him as a threat. And from the meta, it's the accelerationism. Like people who want to complain about policy or whatever, it doesn't matter. Like this is a guy who was censored, persecuted, and he's coming back with middle America on his side. And it'd be incredible shock to the system if he won. And I think that's the larger reason to support him. But to move on to the next person that everyone wants to see in 2024, what are your thoughts on Ron DeSantis?
Yeah, so, I've spoken very positively about Ron DeSantis. I think he's the best governor in America, one of the most conservative governors in America. But that's a pretty low bar. We've seen that recently. That doesn't mean much, with Governor Greg Abbott going after Gab and Arkansas governor and South Dakota governor cucking on the trans bills. It's not really saying much, but he's been pretty good. He took out the sanctuary cities and he passed that really good anti-riot act recently. And, there's been some good things from him, but honestly, it's a little bit concerning that people see him as like a total replacement for Trump, because I see DeSantis as like a good politician, but still a politician. Trump in 2016 was a cultural phenomenon and a revolution because he was a true outsider. He truly was offering something that was totally different, saying the things that he said during the debates and all of that. Obviously, that changed when he got in office. But 2016 campaign Trump was a true revolutionary, true outsider. Ron DeSantis is neither of those things. Ron DeSantis is neither a real revolutionary, nor is he a real outsider. And that's okay. That's what it is. In politics, you have politicians, but that is what he is as a politician. He's a good politician, but he's a politician. And that comes with it a lot of things. For example, on the social media bill, this is the number one most important thing. He's the most conservative governor. He said he was going to make it happen. And we see the social media bill they passed in Florida last week, and it's garbage. I mean, it is just straight up garbage. It doesn't do anything meaningful to protect any conservative from big tech censorship, except for if you're a statewide candidate for elected office, which is such a narrow thing. It doesn't do anything for like 99% of Floridians, 99% of conservatives, or it doesn't even do anything for people that currently hold office. It's so narrow, you might as well have not done it at all. And so for that to be the DeSantis response to the Trump censorship on Twitter and the purges on social media, to me, it shows the limitations of somebody like Ron DeSantis. Clearly, I've heard rumors about what happened there. I can't confirm exactly what happened, but clearly something prevented a real bill from passing, and that's the kind of baggage that a politician brings to the table. It's the same thing that we saw, the same limitations that hamstring Trump when he was in office. And, when I see that, it's almost like, if Trump was hamstringed as a politician by interests and everything and couldn't get it done, well, what makes us think that DeSantis would be as good or better? Because at least Trump was a true outsider, and he had this voice, and this charisma and was exciting, and he was willing to say things that were disruptive, even if he couldn't always do things that were disruptive, and he had a sort of disruptive style. So if Trump and DeSantis have the same political limitations, and DeSantis is not as charismatic, not a cultural phenomenon, doesn't have that voice, doesn't have this sort of disruptive attitude, disruptive style, then I think he's honestly would be worse than Donald Trump. So I used to be a big cheerleader. The social media bill, though, it's kind of reminded me, it's like there was only one Trump, and I don't know, I'm a little skeptical. And honestly, if Bill Kristol likes DeSantis, that's another red flag. So that's kind of my take, is I think the jury's still out on him.
Yeah, I would largely agree with that. I think one of the things about Trump that makes him different, as you pointed out, like, yes, he's a politician. I don't see him as firmly committed to our ideas in the way that Trump is. And people always like complain, well, Trump flip-flop. Trump was instinctually a national. If you look at what he was saying in the 80s and the 90s, a lot of the same things, especially when it comes to crime, especially when it comes to trade, and even with immigration, where he's had some flip-flops on, he definitely suspected that there is something inherently wrong with all these people who are not like us coming here and taking over the country. And that was an instinctual matter. Like, he had advisors telling him, like, no, you need to be open borders. No, you need to give amnesty. No, you need to have open trade, like, and all these stuff. But his instincts said that, like, no, I don't like this. Even with his statement saying, like, why are we taking all these people in from shithole countries? That was an unguarded moment. That was him expressing his own personal opinion in a meeting with lawmakers and his cabinet. You could not see Ron DeSantis saying that because he's a politician. We don't really know what his personal opinions are. He is just responding to the moment, and he's doing the good stuff that we want. He's adopting the good issues that we're on side for, but he realizes that this is the way he needs to do things, because that's the way to political power right now. He saw the Trump moment and it's like, I need to be more like that. And I think Josh Hawley and a couple of other people are just the same. They are politicians. Trump was not a politician. He was instinctually got these issues. I mean, it would have been better if he got them a lot better. But based on his personal conversations, like in his unguarded moments, he would freely say things that, you know, his national space agreed with. And it wasn't necessarily him appealing to them, pandering them just because out of cynicism. He shared their same opinions. And I don't think you have that with DeSantis. And I think also DeSantis is an unknown on foreign policy. Like, I could see him very well being in simpatico with the globalist American empire and doing everything that they're saying, saber rattling against Russia, going to war with Iran. You know, and even in the situations that we're seeing now with this like this hysteria over domestic terrorism, I could see DeSantis, you know, unleashing the security state upon like so-called white supremacists. I don't, even though people complain that Trump did that, Trump at the same time still recognized that these people were his supporters and had a greater reluctance to punishing them. And there were people around his administration who didn't want that. But I don't know if you're necessarily going to have those guardrails there with DeSantis. And also going on your point about the terrible people who support him, you know, I tweeted out about some of his shortcomings. I think, yesterday or Monday, and there was all these people who are like terrible, like neocons and just conservatives who came out of the woodwork to like defend like Ron DeSantis signing a bill to ban anti-Semitic speech on campus, because of course, campus anti-Semitism is the real threat right now, is a major problem, and we need to censor it. And these people are defending it, and these are like his like biggest fans. And even National Review wrote a hit piece on me saying that one of the reasons that Ron DeSantis is good is because evil white nationalist Scott Greer is his enemy, even though all I did was tweet out some of his failings. And these people didn't understand that like I was mocking like populist Inc. types who see him as the Nazi strongman, national Bolshevik leader who's going to topple capitalism, and he's going to do all these great things that Trump couldn't do, and he's going to arrest like Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey, and he's going to use the power of the state. And a lot of these people who are populist Inc. types who really like DeSantis, and they use these arguments that like Trump sucked and he can't trust him. He's just controlled by Jared Kushner, and they think that like Ron DeSantis is going to be Mussolini or Franco. It's just a fantasy. They just want to uphold DeSantis because they're so disappointed with Trump that they just imagine and refuse to acknowledge his shortcomings and his failures and how he is still an inferior, you know, leader to Trump. As you said, he's just a politician. He will completely change his views depending on the day, and the system doesn't view him as a threat. The system views Donald Trump as a threat, and he doesn't have the charisma or dynamism to really electrify that base, to make this base, you know, go to war for him like they would for Trump. And that is a very important part of the nationalist movement that we want to build, is that we have this dynamic, charismatic leader. And DeSantis isn't really like that. I think like if he ran, like, you know, and Trump wasn't there, I mean, he'd probably be the best person, but I wouldn't be that excited about it. I wouldn't be, you know, as tied to him as Trump, because Trump was an actual like folk hero, like an insurgent movement. And it's more of a like, yeah, he'll maybe get some policy things done, but it's not really changing the system. The system stays in place with DeSantis. And if National Review loves him, like how much of a threat is he? And so those are my thoughts. I mean, if there's anything I was wrong on there, feel free to correct. Nick.
No, I totally agree. And I feel the same way. There's a lot of these people that, for I think a lot of emotional reasons or something, maybe it's a political agenda, but they don't like Trump, and they largely don't like Trump for irrational reasons. You know, I know that it's not popular to say in some circles, and people roll their eyes, but I completely agree with you, and I will take this to the grave, that Trump was our guy. Okay, he was our guy in 2016. He was our guy for the past 4 years. And, you know, a lot of people, they look at the Trump administration and its failings, and they attribute that to the fact that, oh, Trump was never he was a con man, or, you know, Trump folded at one point. He turned. And I would attribute it to the fact that this is what happens when you get a guy who has no experience in government or politics suddenly become the president unexpectedly, overnight, basically, right? I mean, this is exactly what you would expect from somebody who their whole life was a real estate developer, TV show host, celebrity, who then suddenly is thrust into the White House and is taken advantage of by, cynical interests and people like Reince Priebus or Johnny DeStefano or, is his own son-in-law, Jared Kushner. And the idea that people are going to see that and say, oh, so necessarily what we need now is another politician is, I think it's very naive. And you're right. People are just looking for the next big thing. Oh, well, Trump failed us. Well, DeSantis is based. You're going to get the same, if not worse, from DeSantis. I almost look at him like a Ted Cruz, because back in 2016, Ted Cruz was okay. I mean, he was saying some base things, but it was all the usual boilerplate Republican stuff. If Ted Cruz, and in fact, DeSantis doesn't say all that much different things than Ted Cruz does today. But Ted Cruz back then was also talking about Iranian mullahs and Israel. We're going to protect Israel and this kind of stuff. So in other words, he put on sort of like the costume of what was trendy at the time, which was a hardcore conservative, maybe something like a populist, maybe something like a nationalist, but still in terms of substance, really not that much different than what they say on Fox News, really not that much different than every other Republican. And like you said, we don't know DeSantis on foreign policy. We don't know that DeSantis is not going to pursue, like you said, going after so-called white supremacists, white nationalists. So I'm in total agreement. I agree. I think DeSantis would be, better than most politicians, but still a politician, and there'll never be another Trump, never be another one like Trump. And conservatives have got to take the lesson of 2016, which is not to pick a policy wonk, to pick somebody that's less offensive. People should take the lesson of 2016 and say, well, we won in 2016. We lost in 8. We lost in 12. We won in 2016. We won in 20. Double down. Get somebody that's vocal. Get somebody that's aggressive. Get somebody that's a populist nationalist. Get somebody that's going to go to war with the left. And all these people look at Trump and they say, oh, the lesson is we need someone that's less offensive, more presidential, more like a politician, a policy wonk who's respectable. And it's going to talk about ideas. It's like, really? That's what you learned from 2016? People got to go back and watch the debates. People got to go back and remember like how we got here in the first place, because people have forgotten.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And all these people imagine that there was some great national populist movement before Trump ruined it in 2016. There was absolutely nothing before Trump. I was there. I was working both at the Daily Caller and under a pseudonym at a certain other place. And there was nothing before Trump. It was like Tea Party stuff, just talking about the deficit and small government. There was like nothing before Trump. And even these people were like, well, there's Pat Buchanan. Pat Buchanan was just a columnist in like before 2016. No, and not very many people were reading him. And there was nothing before Trump. And all these people who complain about Trump, destroying the movement, probably weren't around before 2016. I think it's actually mostly people who weren't around in 2016, or people who imagined that they were going to take over the government after 2016. But of course, they were not going to do that. So I think that that's one thing that needs to be acknowledged. And there's also there's other people who are claiming that because Ron DeSantis gets things done, that he's going to be more of a threat. And it's like, no, they don't care. Like the CIA and FBI is not going to care that he's implementing mandatory E-Verify. Like, I mean, that's a good thing. Like, we're glad he's doing that, but they're not going to give a shit. Like that the system's not going to be threatened. It's like, oh man, he's really getting things done due to the campus anti-Semitism bill he passed, or he is our mandatory E-Verify. We're gonna have to stop him like we did with Trump. No, they don't give a shit about that. They thought that Donald Trump was going to overturn the system. They're never going to think that with DeSantis. And so these things have to be acknowledged that, like, DeSantis is a politician, Trump wasn't, and people need to get with reality that like what's going to happen. And I think another one big thing that like I see a lot of people who complain about Trump is like, oh, personnel is terrible. Where do you think Ron DeSantis is going to get his personnel? It's mostly going to come from Heritage Foundation and National Review telling him who to hire. So this like horrible guy at National Review who's pro Liz Cheney, pro censorship, that guy's going to have more of a chance of having a bigger role in Ron DeSantis's administration than any groyper. So I think that's like something to acknowledge. Yeah, like yes, there is like a temptation to look beyond Trump and hope that there's like some better person on the horizon. But that person is not Ron DeSantis. He's still good at what he's doing at Florida governor. But there's right to be skepticism. So moving along to other politicians, what do you think of Marjorie Taylor Greene?
Yeah, I was initially very excited about her because, she was this QAnon candidate or whatever, and the media went really hard against her. But
And you liked her for QAnon.
I did. Well, only because I don't think QAnon is real or anything, but to me, it showed me that she is not like a lizard person. You know what I mean? Like no high status, like liberal cosmopolitan is going to be a QAnon mom on Facebook posting about Rothschild space laser and all that. They keep saying Jewish space laser. She said Rothschild space laser, which is, I guess, Rothschilds are Jews. So technically that's true. But so I liked her initially for that reason, because I'm like, she's a real grassroots. She's a real Trump supporter. And, maybe she's America first. But I got to be honest. Then I saw she got all this flack. They're talking about stripping her of her committee assignments and maybe expelling her from Congress because of her previous comments. And she goes out and she says, I'm not apologizing for anything. And she raises all this money, sending out flyers, sending out emails and saying, help me raise money. I'm under attack by the media. And then what does she do? She goes to Kevin McCarthy's office. And I'm told that she defended herself, maybe. But she goes to Kevin McCarthy's office and they have this conversation. Kevin McCarthy says, I had a talking to her. And then she comes out on the floor of the Congress and she says, I believe 9/11 was real, and I don't believe in QAnon. And you basically recants all of her statements, gets stripped of her committee positions anyway, and then she comes out in a statement in front of the Capitol and says, like, I feel liberated because I corrected the record and I said what I really believe. And, to me, it was just very weak. I don't know, maybe she would have gotten expelled from Congress, but she had all this pressure on her. And to me, I basically saw that as a fold, because she went up there and she did not technically say, I'm sorry, but she did recant everything. She did go up there and basically concede, these attacks against me are legitimate, good faith. They're right to be concerned, and I'm taking them seriously, and I'm going to correct them. And she basically conceded to the left. She kowtowed. She did what they asked her to do. She bent the knee. She showed obeisance to them and said, no, I don't believe these radical things. And she still got her punishment anyway. And so to me, any kind of like act of contrition, any kind of act of submission towards the left, it's like, we just don't really need that. We don't need people to raise money. And then she goes, I raised all this money off of that. So joke's on you. You raised all this money off of what? Retracting all your statements, getting your position stripped anyway. And then and then you're bragging about you raised money off that. We just, I don't know. So I'm still a little bit undecided on her. I was initially very excited. Her staff is no good. We've had some dealings with her staff. There's people that worked for the Koch brothers in her staff, and so we've had some not good interactions with her staff. She's really given us the cold shoulder. And like I said, from what I've seen so far, not a very strong record. So maybe that'll change. Maybe that'll improve. But for now, I'm not really thrilled about her.
I like MTG. I think the main problem with her is that she's an outsider. She doesn't really get these politics, and she's in a very weak position. I think she can do a lot of better things. Hopefully, she's learning from her errors, but I'm probably a little bit more positive about her. She is like an embodiment of middle America going to Congress and just like irritating people. And I like the fact that she put up like the sign, like there are only two genders across from the Democratic Congresswoman who's like got a transgender child or something. She is like a troll in chief. I think she needs to be a little bit better disciplined and learn from her mistakes. But I probably would say I'm a little bit more positive about MTG than her. But I understand where you're coming from, and I largely agree with your points. So moving along to somebody else you've been publicly negative about, but to get a clear thoughts on what you think about this person, what are your thoughts on JD Vance?
Yeah, I don't like him. I don't like him. I don't know what your feelings are. I'd be interested. I go on Twitter like every day and put JD Vance on blast. And
I see that every day.
well, because it's maddening. I mean, I see this guy, and I didn't hate him from the beginning. I saw him. I'm going to be honest. I don't like the way he looks. I think he looks disgusting. I don't know why he looks like that, but he grew this beard out for that reason. I know, you just know that he brought on a consultant that said, like, there's no way that fat, swollen face is winning a Senate seat. You got to grow a beard. You got to change it up. I mean, that's why he grew a beard. That's why he's got this folksy look now, and he's got his beard and his lumberjack flannel. It's because he looked like shit before. I don't know what's wrong with him, but so that was my very juvenile reaction from the outset. Nothing wrong with being weird looking. You know, people say I'm weird looking, whatever. But then I do a little digging on this guy. And the more digging that I do, the more I find. I find out that he works for CNN. He works for the American Enterprise Institute. He wrote this op-ed in the New York Times about how Barack Obama was a genius and everyone just hated him because they were jealous of him and racist. And he voted for Evan McMullin. He called Trump a racist and an idiot. And like, the list goes on, and he's graduated from Yale. And taking all of this together, it's like at the minimum, this guy is sus. Okay, this guy is straight up suspect, you know, and like, look, I'm willing to believe that somebody like that can make a 180. I am willing to believe that someone can change their mind, because whenever I criticize this guy on Twitter, I get people saying, well, he changed his mind. Well, he's saying based things now. And I'm like, okay, be that as it may, answer the question. Tell me why I, as a Trump supporter, nationalist, should support you, who works for CNN and AEI, everything I just said, given your background. I want to hear someone ask the question, and I want to hear it addressed. It's not good enough for people to tell me, oh, well, he's good. Just trust me. He's good. No, I don't trust that, actually. I don't trust him. I don't know him. And I feel like somebody like him would call somebody like me racist. So I want to hear from JD Vance why it's not a big red flag that he called Trump a racist, that he's in love with Barack Obama, he's an Obama lover, that he worked for AEI and CNN. I want to hear from him, and I want to hear the question asked on Tucker Carlson or something, why we should trust this guy, because I haven't heard it asked, and it's very suspicious, because I see him getting shilled all the time on the timeline, curiously, right after he gets all this money from Peter Thiel. Nothing wrong with Peter Thiel, but he gets this huge cash injection from Thiel. And now all of a sudden, you see all these people on the timeline posting his videos. Everyone's working for him. Everyone's shilling his stuff. And I feel like the only guy that's asking these like, and it's not like I'm being picky here. People are saying you're purity spiraling to ask why the Evan McMullin, Obama guy, AEI, CNN, Yale guy is suddenly a populist nationalist. That's a purity spiral. That's too high of a standard for someone to pass. And I'm not even saying I hate the guy or I never vote for him. Or support him, I should say. I don't live in Ohio, but I'm asking, can he explain? Can anyone who's shilling him explain why these things are not red flags? And I don't get answers. I get defensiveness. I get people saying, well, he's the best in his field. Well, maybe change his mind. That's just not good enough. People can change their minds, but I want to hear him explain why he did, what his new views are, how that happened. I want to hear it from the people that supposedly believe in what we believe in, but support him. And what's more is, not only does he have to explain all of that. I was going to say one other thing. I lost my train of thought, but that he changed his mind. Oh, and also, it's not good enough that he's the best in his field. I'm sorry, but being the best in your field, I'm willing to let Republicans lose primaries and lose generals, even to Democrats, if they're not good enough. We don't need a phony. If JD Vance is not a sincere person, I would prefer an establishment hack. I would prefer any day of the week a faker, incompetent establishment hack Republican, maybe winning the primary and winning the general, or even losing, than to have some phony who's going to get in there and say America first and then believe all this crap. So that's my take on him. I'm open-minded about anything, but I come at it with the criticism. I find more bad stuff. People get defensive. I double down on it. I get more vicious, and then that's where I am right now. But I'm open-minded.
Okay, well, I was actually very negative when he first came out, and mainly because like I hate all the people who are like huge JD Vance fans. Like I think of like Ross Douthat, Rod Dreher. I mean, it's like such populist Inc. people who are just like terrible. And I've known about all those problems. How he voted for McMullen in 2016. He's called Trump a racist, and I acknowledge all those problems with him. But I would say, even though you're talking about the best in the field, there's a couple of things. First off, we do want more of our politicians repeating our talking points, and he is moving. I think he does need to show like a little bit more genuine. But he is defending stuff like when Tucker was talking about demographic replacement, he defended Tucker on that, and it was specifically, not even like ignoring like the controversial aspects. He was fully defending that. He is somebody who does support immigration restriction. He is pretty good on foreign policy. The problem is I think there is like this level of suspicion, and we don't want him to run for more than anything than senator, and we don't necessarily want him to be seen as a leader. But I think as like somebody who is a strong Senate candidate who is echoing our talking points and are not necessarily echoing talking points, and I don't want people to like say like, oh, JD Vance is adopting like these evil America First talking points. I think it's somebody who is like, going in that direction of a nationalist direction, who is like supporting immigration reduction, who is like pretty good on foreign policy. And that's something that's like separates him from Desantis and all these other issues. And I think if he got into the Senate, he would be pretty reliable. The problem is like I'm really not comfortable with him as like the fact of him as like an America First leader either. And I don't necessarily want to turn him into that. But I think in the terms of regards of transforming the GOP in towards of being a more nationalist vehicle, he does support that mission. And it is like fairly important that he is the best in the field. And it's not necessarily that we're settling for him. This is somebody who's directly repeating Tucker talking points. And we do want more of our senators and congressmen to be like Tucker Carlson, even though I know we'll get into Tucker the next question, but we want people like that running the party who are senators. We don't, and I think he is more genuine than someone like Ted Cruz. Or maybe even someone like Josh Hawley, even though Josh Hawley is doing much better with Trump out of office. I've actually been surprised by Josh Hawley than that if he's in the Senate. And so him winning, regardless of who he is and the background and all his problems, if he won that primary, that would be a victory for the nationalist wing of the party, and him becoming a senator would add another person to that. Now, I've said in previous podcasts that like when you want to look for the Trump model and people who are running for office right now who are more like Trump, I view it as someone like Mo Brooks. Mo Brooks talks about the culture and identity issues. That guy never backs down. He talks about the war on whites. He was at the forefront of challenging the election. He is what middle Americans want as the representative. And Trump endorsed him for the Senate, and he's likely to be senator. I see Mo Brooks as somebody as a much better standard bearer for the America First movement and much better representative of it, because he gets the culture and identity issues, and he knows that's more important than the industrial policy and whatever. But Vance, for what he does and him being a senator, I still would see it as a larger victory, even though there are suspect aspects about him. And I certainly have my questions and issues with him. I still think in terms of like, who do we want to attack and like direct our fire to? It needs to be people like Kevin McCarthy, Mitch McConnell, Liz Cheney, James Lankford, like these like horrible establishment people. And even if you look at the rest of the field, it's like it's a clown show. Like Josh Mandel, as I've said repeatedly, is like a Stephen Colbert parody of what a Republican or fire-breathing conservative is. Like this dude is like a clown. Everything he does is just like such a clownish, like it just doesn't realize what middle America is about. And it just imagines that like they want like Larry the Cable Guy as their senator, but it's this like it's like this Ivy League educated Jewish guy. It's like as like their person, but he's like, he can't be Larry the Cable Guy. And then there's all these other terrible establishment people who would likely support amnesty. So I would say, he's not ideal. And if I had the choice of like, if there was somebody better in that field, I would totally be that way. And I also share the same concerns that you have. But I've grown to be more positive because I see in the larger picture, like him winning the primary is a victory for the national swing of the GOP, and it helps transform the GOP in the direction we want it to go. So in some ways, maybe it might be better to overlook some of his failures, but that's just me. I'm open to another interpretation here.
Yeah, like I said, I'm open-minded about it. I just wish that these concerns were addressed, because if he or if one of the people pushing him would come out and say, like, well, here's how he went from libtard to based, I would say, okay, I can get behind this guy. I mean, really, I could, because I'm a pragmatist. I don't really care about the petty personal stuff. I think it's fun, actually. But the political side of it, like I like the banter and everything. I wish someone would come out and say, here's why we shouldn't be concerned about those things. If somebody, and I would like to hear it from him, if he could lay out the bigger picture and say, okay, this is the deal, then I could get behind that, because a lot of what you're saying makes sense and I get it, but I just want to hear from the horse's mouth. Here's why I shouldn't be concerned that he loves Obama, hates Trump, worked for literally the American Enterprise Institute, because these are big red flags. And if we're trying to vet this guy, he's saying all the right things. I agree with you. And he's saying better things than anybody else, frankly, better than, like you said, Hawley, better than DeSantis. He's coming out there as like a forceful populist voice, but it's just like, where'd this guy come from? It's the baggage, which is the trouble here. So if he were to come out and say, okay, well, I thought this, and I had this evolution, and now I think populists are right, something like that, whatever, I could get behind it, but I want to hear it first.
Yeah, I agree. And I think he should address why he voted for McMullen than Trump. And that's one big thing for me. But moving on to the final person, I want to get your thoughts on Tucker, because there's been a lot of differences between you. You've had your problems with Tucker. So I want to get, like, right now, what are your thoughts on Tucker Carlson?
I'm 100% pro Tucker now. And yeah, I'm not, I won't shy away from the fact that I was very Tucker during the election. And I still, well, in fairness, I talked to some people, and people have told me why he might have done what he did back then. During Stop the Steal, I felt like we were going out there and we were campaigning everywhere to have the state legislatures overturn the voter fraud in the presidential election. I mean, I went to Lansing, Atlanta, DC, Phoenix, Harrisburg. I was spending tens of thousands of dollars of my own money, and it was crazy. Crazy, hectic schedule, and just doing everything that I could. And I'm just some guy, I don't have any connections for the most part in, like, these state governments or anything. I was just doing whatever I could to get the state legislatures to do whatever they could to keep Trump in office, because I recognized the urgent threat, the imminent threat that was posed by the Biden administration. I knew the gravity of it even back then. I knew that it was going to be catastrophic if he got in. It turned out to be true. And I saw Tucker, and night after night, he would not talk about the election fraud. And when he did, he talked about how Sidney Powell wouldn't come on his show. And look, I agree. Sidney Powell turned out to be a little bit of a kook, and she was focusing on the wrong parts of the election fraud. They were focused on chasing this Dominion thing, when in reality was the mail-in ballots. So it's not even like I'm white knighting for Sidney Powell. It's like, night after night, you do your show for millions and millions of people. This is going on, and it was hardly talked about. Instead, he would talk about, oh, the polls were wrong, or, whatever. So it was just, like, shocking why he didn't go out to bat for Trump in as much as he could have back then. And it was like, it felt like a personal betrayal, because it's like, if I could go out and do it, and I'm putting my ass on the line, and I'm wearing a bulletproof vest and hiring security and spending all my money doing this kind of stuff, it's like, why can't Tucker just throw a little support our way? So I was anti-Tucker for a little while because of that. And even recently, he made that comment where he said, replacement migration basically is happening, but it's a voting rights issue. And I said, and he goes, it's not about white, it's not about race. And I said, well, how productive is it really to explicitly deny that it's racial? How productive is it to go there? Because I think it is a good thing to go there and expose people to that, but then turn around and say, oh yeah, well, it's definitely not a race thing. It's merely about this. And it was a question. It wasn't like, hey, this isn't good enough, you need to go all the way, name them. It's not like that. No, I just said open-ended. I said, how is this really helping us to go halfway and then disavow the rest? To say replacement is happening, but if you think it's racial, you're a white supremacist, it's not racial. You know what I mean? So I question how there's an argument to be made that it's effective. I think there's an argument to be made that it's not. But then Then he comes back on the show on Monday, a couple of weeks ago, and he blows open the whole thing on replacement migration and says nationalism for me and not for thee. And the ADL said that. And then he really went all the way, dropped the whole red pill about what's happening, talked about replacing the demographics. He got California in there, Israel, ADL. I mean, it was all there. And it was the truth. I mean, that's why it was so effective, is because he just dropped a truth bomb on like 4 or 5 million people on Monday, a couple of weeks ago. And so that to me was totally redeeming in my eyes. I thought that was a huge risk. That was like the most truthful thing I've ever heard on cable news, on Fox News. And I've been watching Fox News since I was in high school. I've been watching Fox News for like 10 years, And so that's the most red-pilled, truthful thing I ever heard. That if he was not who he said he was, he would have never said something like that, So to me, that was totally redeeming in my eyes. And look, I mean, I've always been pro Tucker. I did not like the election coverage. I was dubious about what he initially said about replacement migration. But to me, that was so epic. It completely redeemed him. And then he went and mentioned my no-fly situation. So I'm very pro Tucker now.
Okay, well, I think I would probably largely agree with everything with that. To shift gears a little bit, because I got a final question, but I'm going to bring up the Patreon questions, because the Patreon question is not as serious. It's not necessarily the best note to go off of. So I'm going to bring up the Patreon question before we get to the final question. As a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me or a guest questions if you sign up for the Patreon option that highly respected Patreon. This one comes from Matt. He asks, Scott, why is David Hogg so mad about your IQ? Why also are liberals so obsessed with your penis size? These are some great questions. David Hogg, for some reason, came into my mentions because I rightfully attacked Joy-Ann Reid for her. It's clear she got into Harvard for affirmative action. Like, she's a total moron. She gets basic facts of geography, history, and politics wrong all the time. And she's clearly not a very smart person. And she was brought into Harvard due to her race. I mean, that's an abundant fact. That's what Tucker called her out on. And that's why she responded saying, I got high SAT. I was so smart. And this really narcissistic rant she went on. And nobody believes that. And David Hogg, who also didn't get to Harvard on merit because he got rejected by UCF, which is an inferior school to Harvard, and he didn't have that high of an SAT score, came in to attack me for putting my very accurate IQ standard in there and to get very angry that I would dispute that a clear affirmative action applicant was accepted due to affirmative action. And so but all these people always take the bait on the IQ. They never learn from the answer, from the question, and they always get very mad about the IQ and the height. And then they demand to see my penis because that's, for some reason, I must have I'm a tiny dick Cuban, as they always say. And it's always this it's a very weird American cultural phenomenon where we imagine that people who have typical right wing or masculine traits must have a small penis, because it's like you're compensating. And it's like, I don't know why Americans are so obsessed with penis, and it's something driven by the culture as well. And also, one funny thing, if they're claiming about dick size, height correlates with that. So I'm already listing it in some ways in my bio. So all those people can keep being mad, but I don't. It's a very weird phenomenon that they imagine. It's a very feminine way of arguing. It's like saying oh, you must have a small penis, or you just hate women, or you just need to get laid, or whatever. It's it's the women argue. There's the meme I always love to show where it's a wheel, and it's the woman deciding which argument to pick, and it's small penis, live at home, blah blah blah. Never, you're incel. These are their whole argument schemes. It's very entertaining to me. When these popular blue checks get in my mentions and decide to own me by pointing out my highly accurate IQ or height score. And I guess it's intimidating to David Hogg, who knows that he has a very low IQ and did not get into Harvard on merit. So, and that's all I can say on that matter. I don't know if you have any further thoughts, Nick. You get some of the similar attacks as well.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's always the go-to is small dick, small dick. That's yeah, the wheel of awful insults. And well, and I love your profile because it says what is it, 187 IQ, 6'3" or 6'2" or whatever.
6'2", and then
Yeah.
it's like highly respected, and they're like, "Who highly respects you?" And I was like, "Everybody, you know,
Right.
I just am."
And I like the highly respected Daily Caller alum. People freak out about that. People freaked out about that for years. You know, who says highly respected? I stole that for a while. For a while, I put Boston U alum in my bio, and people would say he didn't even graduate from there because I didn't. I dropped out after like a year. So yeah, it's funny. They seethe about that because they always go for that kind of shit. You know, if they can't like. First, they say, "Oh, well, you're short, or you're dumb, or you're you know, at least for me, college dropout. You didn't drop out of college." But so when you throw that in the bio, then they just got to resort to, "Oh, small dick, small dick." But it's just you know, that's just stupid shit women say. Women say
like,
that
you're very insecure. It's like, no, I'm very secure. I'm just telling the world like all these great attributes about myself. And they can't believe that you can be 16 IQ 187, but you can. And the funniest thing, the one final note before going to the final question is like, the funniest is like putting highly respected Daily Caller alum, because I know that agitates all these Daily Caller staffers that I have it in there. And then they have to endure like these liberals who are like, how dare you call yourself a highly respected Daily Caller? There's nothing respectable about Daily Caller. And they would love to rush to my mentions like, we don't respect him. We don't like him. Please disavow him. We've disavowed him. And they just always have to deal with that. And then people tag the Daily Caller and Daily Caller staffers whenever I'm trending and demand to understand why they allow this racist there. So it's always very funny. I enjoy, that's probably the funniest thing is like thinking about how mad like Neil Patel and these other people at the Daily Caller get whenever I'm trending and people are making fun of the Daily Caller and anyone who would claim that they're highly respected, because they in their minds think that every other alumni of the Daily Caller is highly respected by society, but it's not. So that's the joke, and the Daily Caller doesn't get it. But to further, the final thing I want to ask you is, what do you view as the future of the right, and what are your future projects right now?
So yeah, the future of the right. I think we agreed is it's going to be this civil war now over Trump. I mean, Trump is still the biggest thing in the GOP in the sense it's like the Star Wars sequel trilogy. It's like, what happens after Darth Vader dies? You know, what happens after the Empire falls apart? It's like, well, it doesn't really go away. You know what I mean? It's like the Roman Empire. Maybe that's a less cringe analogy. The Roman Empire doesn't just go away. It doesn't just disappear overnight. Same with like the Soviet Union. And the same goes for Trump. Just because Trump is out of office doesn't mean that it's all over. Obviously, now we've got to deal with the so-called aftermath. And I say that because it's still a little bit contingent of the Trump administration. He came in, he shook things up, he caused this tremendous disruption. And now Biden's in, so the system is fully back in control. And now it's sort of like, well, how do we deal with this? How do we deal with the destruction of the Death Star? It'd almost be like the reverse, almost, right? How do we deal with the fact that Trump made this big move, and now the system is back in control and is punishing its people? And the right is sort of regathering after that. They're sort of regrouping, and obviously the forces that are the most powerful are the GOP establishment is trying to reconstitute itself. It wasn't just the establishment that was blown up in 2016. It was the GOP establishment first, and in particular. Trump came in there and blew up Jeb Bush and Rubio and Cruz, and they obviously found their way back into his good graces over the past 5 years. Ted Cruz is now one of his favorite senators. He endorsed Rubio and liked Mitch McConnell up until the 6th and everything. So now the GOP establishment, after Stop the Steal, after the past 4 years, I mean, really ultimately after their primary defeat in 2016, they're regrouping and they are trying to, regain control over the GOP. It's a very concerted effort. They have been trying to make this happen for the past 5 years and planning for it. That when Trump leaves office, they want to sink their claws back into the party, and they want to run Nikki Haley. They want to run Tim Scott. They want it to be the way that it used to be. And then the question is, well, obviously, people are not going to let that happen without a fight. There are forces opposed to the GOP, and some of them are opportunists, some of them are phonies, some of them are authentic. But really, it's this war of succession now over who will take control of the party now that Trump is in exile, basically. It may be Trump. Trump may, like Napoleon, he may come back and have one final stand in 2024, and maybe it'll work. But that's not, we don't know that that'll happen yet. So now it's really the GOP reconstituting itself. And then there's this battle for who will succeed Trump, carrying on the revolution. Who will be the vanguard of the Trump legacy? Will it be these opportunists who are going to redefine it? Will it be phonies who are really GOP establishment but presenting as America first? Or will it be a more authentic sort of grassroots thing? Will it be the real Trump supporters, the real populist, nationalists? Will it be people that'll innovate and build on what Trump did rather than cynically exploiting it or redirecting it towards an institutional ends? So that's what I see as the future of the right. And my projects that are coming up, I don't really, there's nothing I can announce right now, but we have a lot of stuff. We have a lot of stuff working on right now. We're planning an event for fall. We're planning maybe a little tour in the fall. And we're working on the platform, AmericaFirst.live. We continue to work on that. Should be done within a couple of months. We're just, it's a lot of work trying to implement some new features. And once that happens, we haven't really had a hard launch for the platform yet. We're going to, over the summer, and we're going to do like marathon streams and really going to hit the marketing hard. Right now, the platform is still developing. So once it's done, we're going to really push it. So that's on the horizon for me. But thank you so much for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, you are mighty welcome, Nick. And just give the followers, I'm sure most people already follow you, or they're blocked. But if they're not know who you are, and maybe they could set up another account to follow you. You can, of course, follow Nick on Twitter at Nick J. Fuentes. And I think your Telegram is the same at?
Yes, at Nick J. Fuentes.
And you can watch him every night. Where at? Tell the people, good people where?
AmericaFirst.live.
And I think also Good Morning Groyper is on Telegram every day or every Friday at noon Eastern.
Central, noon Central.
Noon Central. It should be noon Eastern because America runs on Eastern time.
Yeah.
What is this?
I'm in Central.
That's not even good morning. That's good afternoon.
That's the joke.
Yeah,
good morning.
Well, that is good morning for if you're on gamer time, because those people are not waking up till like 3 or 4 some days. So that's like an early morning for some people. But anyway, thanks for coming on, Nick. We can't wait to have you back on.
Thanks a lot. Thank you for having me. People out.
You're welcome. And until next time, stay respected.